Hello everyone, Santier here, and welcome to the Marksmanship section under the Ranger section of my Guild Wars 1 skill review project. And Marksmanship is predominantly composed of bow attacks and bow attacking adjacent things. For example, Read the Wind and Rapid Fire are not bow attacks, but they're caring about bows, so they end up in here. Read the Wind is just kind of a generic preparation, and Rapid Fire specifically for bows. And I believe, Favorable Winds is in here as well, which specifically cares about arrows and stuff like that. So it's mainly bow attacks and a few... I don't know how they split up preparations, but there's a few preparations in here, and Favorable Winds, which is specifically about bow attacks. A few notes about Marksmanship. Obviously, bow damage and critical rates scale with it, as Marksmanship's description will helpfully inform you. There are different types of bows. Expertise does make all of these skills cheaper than they appear to be. And I guess we'll go ahead and get into it. So something that we are going to see come up is... moves slower, things like that. Stuff that modify the arrow's fire rate. There's a couple of skills that care about that, including Arcing Shot here, our first skill. When it says that, what it means is that the arrow itself takes a bigger arc. It takes longer to get to its target, so it's more likely to stray. This is something that wasn't really a feature, and isn't really a feature of any other physically attacking professions, attack skills. But the fact of the matter is, arrows can miss. They can stray from their target because their target can change direction, adjust how they're moving, and the arrows will just go right past them. That means that moving slower is a huge downside. And it's not something that's comparable. It would be kind of like if there was, say, a sword attack that had some nice effect, but had a, 10-15% chance of missing or something like that. It's similar conceptually to something like that. So it's not 100% guaranteed or anything. It's not quite that same sort of like just roll of the dice. There's some actions that can be taken. Like knocked down enemies obviously can't run, so it's not going to miss those. But I just wanted to be clear about what that 50% slower thing is. We're going to see it in other stuff. Not a whole lot of skills, but broadhead arrow. Moves slower than normal, stuff like that. And you'll see things that make arrows move faster than normal. That makes them more accurate, more likely to hit. So it's important to understand that property of how bows work. And obviously, something like a flat bow, this is going to make that arc very strong, very noticeable. Something like a recurve bow, this is definitely going to impact that, but it's not going to be quite as egregious, if that makes sense. So I think it's important to understand some of the mechanics here of how bows work in this discussion before we kind of launch into things. So, Arcing Shot is 5 energy, 6-second recharge bow attack. If it hits, it strikes for plus 20 damage, which is a pretty reasonable amount of additional damage. This arrow cannot be blocked, but it moves 50% slower. This is a solid 3 for me. It's fine. The move 50% slower is not great, but it's not, like, the worst. Not being able to be blocked is... And the damage are all really nice things. Not being able to be blocked is obviously a huge upside. Plus 20 damage is really, really nice. Only being 5 energy. 6-second recharge is... So, I think of 6-second as being a little on the medium side, if that makes sense. Where some of the skills that I'm really looking for have like 4 and 5-second recharges. So, for example, Power Shot is 3, which is very quick. And like Sundering Attack is like 4. But I definitely view 6 seconds as acceptably medium. This is just not a skill that I tend to bring very often. I feel like there's other options that I prefer over it, so it's fine, but unexciting. That's kind of how I feel about it. Barrage. Barrage is 5 energy, 1-second recharge, elite bow attack. All your preparations are removed. Shoot arrows at target foe and up to 5 foes adjacent to your target. These arrows strike for plus 15 damage if they hit. This is a very, very, very powerful skill. I'm going to give it a 4. It's almost 5 worthy, but the reason it's not is because it's elite. There are other times where I want other elites. A common one being this guy we'll get to in a moment called Broadhead Arrow. And I might want other elites in other attribute lines and stuff like that. But Barrage is a very strong consideration a lot of the time. The 1 second recharge basically means that you can use this with every shot. It deals a bunch of additional damage at plus 15, and its area of effect. It is the smallest area at adjacent range, so that gives it a little bit of consideration. It's often rare that you're going to hit all 6 targets with it, but Barrage is very powerful, and the only reason why it's not a 5 is because Volley exists. We're going to get to Volley at the very end, but it's basically a non-elite version of Barrage, and that displaces it. Also, if I specifically want a preparation, Barrage doesn't work with those, obviously, so I can't bring Barrage with a preparation. It's just kind of how it is. But very, 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 very powerful, and certainly an elite, well worth considering. Body Shot. 5 energy, 8 second recharge, bow attack. If this attack hits, you deal plus 15 damage, which is a perfectly fine amount, if unexciting. If it hits a foe with correct armor, you gain 8 energy. Excuse me. So this is a 4 for me. It is not quite the same sort of 4 as Barrage is. To be clear, Barrage is like a 4.5 type of 4. Or a 4.4 or something like that. You know what I mean. Body Shot is a skill that I often will bring. Rangers can get a little tight on energy at times, and this is a good way of doing energy management. Obviously, you need to make your party with cracked armor in mind, but that's not necessarily a bad idea, especially in late game areas that are going to have a lot of enemies with ludicrous amounts of armor. So, I'm perfectly happy to run Body Shot. You are bringing this for the energy management, though, not the damage. It's not good enough for that. Not with an 8 second recharge, in my opinion. But the and so you have to be planning cracked armor. But the energy management aspect that it provides, keep in mind, expertise means that this is cheaper than 5. It's probably going to be around 2 or 3 energy, so you are getting a little bit more out of the energy gain than it might look on the surface. It's probably more of a 5 to 6 energy you're getting out of this rather than 3. So Body Shot, useful in that regard. Not always going to make it onto a bar, but certainly a strong consideration. Broadhead Arrow. 15 energy, 15 second recharge, elite bow attack. You shoot a broadhead arrow that moves slower than normal. I'm not exactly sure how much slower, but if it hits, target foe is dazed for 15 seconds, and if target foe is casting a spell, that spell is interrupted, which is kind of redundant. I believe the dazed, it gets applied before the damage or something. I'm not sure. But anyway, dazed, this is like a premier way of inflicting dazed. Dazed is a very powerful condition for shutting down enemies, or for spellcasting enemies, because it means that you can just attack them and interrupt their spells. And it makes their spells take longer to activate, so it's easier to do. I really like this if I have a good reason to want to be shutting down spellcasters very powerfully. And usually a single spellcaster that I really want to stop. I really like this in factions for dealing with, and I guess any campaign really, for dealing with elementalist bosses. If you know a deadly, high-leveled, powerful elementalist boss is coming up, like elementalist damage is underwhelming when you're the player against high-level enemies, but there is some amount of level taken into account with the damage formula. High-level elementalists, especially bosses that get damage buffs, like factions bosses deal double damage, and when they're higher level than you, so they have way more attribute points put in things, their elementalist spells can hit for 170 plus damage. It can be absolutely ridiculous, an area of effect, and just totally wreck your party. So Broadhead Arrow is a really good way of shutting those types of bosses down. I generally am not going to bring this for standard adventuring, but I think this is worth having a 4 because it is such a powerful way of applying Dazed reliably. And Dazed can be extremely powerful in certain scenarios and in certain situations. So this is a low 4, a high 3 for me sort of skill. In some regards, it's almost a 2 in that it's a skill that I'm usually only going to bring for circumstances. I'm not usually just tossing it onto a bar. But I certainly don't object to just tossing it onto a bar, and indeed, Daze is a very powerful condition, and this is a very good way of applying it. I do appreciate that the sort of skill exists to give Ranger a bit of a focus in this area. Paragons can also kind of play in this area a little bit as well, but that requires 10 adrenaline, so this is kind of the premier way of inflicting dazed in my mind. So Broadhead Arrow, very strong skill. Burning Arrow, 10 energy, 5-second recharge, elite bow attack. If this attack hits, you strike for plus 23 damage and cause burning for... actually, I have been doing all of these, I've just noticed, with my expertise being too low. So Arcing Shot should be 22 damage, 17 damage on Barrage, 9 energy and 17 damage on Body Shot, Broadhead Arrow lasting for 17 seconds. Sorry I didn't notice that earlier. I just, for some reason, was confused about the order of things. Wilderness Survival is higher up in the attribute list, but because the attributes are sorted alphabetically, it is lower down in the list of skills. So I'm doing this by the list of which skills show up, not by the list of the attributes and things above, and that's where I got confused. My apologies. Anyway, I noticed because Burning Arrow, I was pretty sure was for 6 seconds, and Burning not 5. So Burning Arrow, like I said, 10 energy, 5-second recharge, elite bow attack. If this attack hits, you strike for plus 26 damage and cause burning for 6 seconds. This is one of the longer lasting burnings in the game. Certainly not the longest. There's a couple elemental spells that inflict burning for longer, but this hits really, really, really hard. That said, I'm typically not bringing this. Like, I'm okay with bringing this. I'm going to give this... This is really kind of a 3 territory, but like a 3 point something. This does work really well with barbed arrows or apply poison, which add additional degeneration up to the cap. There's a couple of different ways and times in which this game has the theme of like arrows on fire, and this is definitely a powerful representation of that concept that I'm quite happy to bring, but I'm going to give this one a 3. I'm going to give this a 3 just because usually this is not what I'm doing with a ranger. This is usually not what I'm doing with my elite. If I'm specifically bringing a ranger, I'm probably going in a slightly different direction using a slightly different elite. So powerful skill, but often passed over for me. So I think 3 is reasonable for my usage of it. Other people might use it a lot more. Concussion Shot. 25 energy, a half-second activation time. Keep in mind that the arrow leaves halfway through the activation time, so it's quarter second that the arrow goes out. 5-second recharge, bow attack. If Concussion Shot hits while target foe is casting a spell, the spell is interrupted and your target is dazed for 17 seconds. This attack only deals 13 damage. 13 armor, ignoring damage for what it's worth, but that's just a piddly amount, so you don't really care either way. You're using this... it's really weird to me, by the way. So Warrior has a number of interrupts that are like, doesn't deal damage, right? Whereas the Ranger's version of that is, well, it deals damage and ignores armor, but just a small amount. I don't know. It's just a little bit of a stylistic difference between the two professions. I think it's kind of interesting. This is powerful. This is a non-elite way of being able to apply Dazed. It is a long-lasting Dazed at 17 seconds, just like Broadhead Arrow. The recharge is super low, but you do have to hit spells for it to work. And 25 energy is a lot, even with expertise on a ranger. I'm generally not going to bring this unless I'm going really high in expertise. The energy cost is just way too high. If I want Dazed, I'm going to bring Broadhead Arrow. Excuse me. Otherwise, for my interrupting needs, I'm going to bring like Savage Shot and Disrupting Shot and kind of call it there. If I want additional options, I have additional options like Disrupting Shot down here is an option. But Concussion Shot does have a very quick recharge, and the effect is powerful if you're able to land it. So I just usually don't bring this because the energy cost of it is so high. I'm kind of not sure exactly where I want to put it. I think it's somewhere around... Oh... I'm torn between like a 2 and a 3. I'm going to call it a 2. I think that this one is, like, it's just expensive enough. Like, this would be a prime candidate for, like, a 20 energy cost skill. It's probably too good for 15, but 25 is so high. I just don't bring this most of the time because it is so expensive. Even with expertise, chopping a huge amount off, you need like 16 expertise to drop this down to like what would that be? 8 energy roughly, and that's like palatable. So yeah, I just do not bring this most of the time because it's just way too much energy use to really warrant bringing. Crippling Shot, or as we called it back in the day, Crip Shot, because we liked to abbreviate things. 10 energy, 4-second recharge, elite bow attack. If Crippling Shot hits, your target becomes crippled for 9 seconds. This attack cannot be blocked. I should add, by the way, on Concussion Shot that I really do appreciate that this skill exists. I think it fits in a useful way, and it's a very nice option to have, even if I'm not terribly excited about it because of the energy cost. Anyway, Crippling Shot. This attack cannot be blocked is a really relevant clause of this. This is not, however, a skill that I would tend to bring in PvE a whole lot. It's basically an elite version of Pin Down, which also similarly just cripples. This is an elite, though, and using up your elite slot is pretty significant. The cripple duration is not that long on this either. 9 seconds is a little on the short side. I like this skill a lot from a nostalgia standpoint. It works great with Apply Poison. That's a PvP build, though. And while I have fond memories of that PvP build and the cripple duration increasing recurve bow that makes it last for a bit longer, 33% longer, so in this case it'd be 12 seconds instead of 9. This is not a very good PvE skill. You don't need to apply crippled that often. You're taking up your elite slot on it. It's just not quite worth that. Pin Down is perfectly adequate if you want to cripple with a ranger. And if you want to snare enemies, may I recommend Deep Freeze Water Elementalist. So yeah, it's good at what it does, which is crippling things, but that's just not important enough in a lot of PvE to really be worth it. There are certain circumstances where it can apply, which makes me sad just because I have fond memories of this from PvP. But that PvP build just does not translate to PvE at all. So here we are. I'm going to go ahead and give this... I think I'm going to give this a 2. And some amount of that's nostalgia talking, if I'm being honest. Yeah. I just don't think... I think a lot of the time you're just not getting that much bang for your elite slot buck out of this is the real problem. Crossfire. 5 energy, 4-second recharge, bow attack. If this attack hits target foe, it deals plus 17 damage. If that foe is near any of your allies, this attack cannot be blocked. Near is a pretty big area of effect, so... A lot of the time, especially if you have a melee attacker or a pet, this is unblockable on your target, most likely. I like this one pretty well. It deals a decent amount of plus damage. It's only 5 energy. 4-second recharge is pretty low. This is definitely one of the skills that I will tend to pick up, but I'm going to pick it up after Keen Arrow, typically, just because Keen Arrow has more chance to hit harder. But it's certainly an option and one that can find its way onto my bar. I'm going to give this one... Oh, goodness. I want to give this, like, a high 3. I'm going to give this a 4, but that's a 4 with asterisks of, like... it's more of a high 3 than a full 4, if that makes sense. But I'm not using any partial scores here, so here we are. Debilitating Shot. 10 energy, 10-second recharge, bow attack. If it hits, your target loses 8 energy. So this is a 2, because I'm going to be blunt. Randomly making somebody lose 8 energy is just not useful. I mean, it's not useful, but it's not useful enough to dedicate skill slot to. I would bring this in a build that's dedicated to trying to wear out enemies' energy. and if you're specifically trying to apply pressure and stuff like that, this becomes pretty good. This is a much better skill in PvP where you're trying to do that more. PvE does not have the same considerations, and unfortunately for the Ranger, some of its skills are way more catered towards PvP than they are PvE, and PvE is my focus in this. So if you're making specifically an energy denial build, this can be a part of that. 8 energy is a pretty sizable chunk, and there are other options in Ranger that you can bring along with you, such as Quicksand or Quickening Zephyr as well, to aid in... Actually, this works really well with Quickening Zephyr. But anyway, I'm kind of losing track of things. Quickening Zephyr makes skills cost more energy. It's a nature ritual that makes a spirit that makes skills cost more energy and recharge faster. So you can recharge this more often to burn away more energy, and it makes all of their skills more expensive, so the energy loss hurts even more. But Debilitating Shot is a skill that you're having to make a dedicated energy denial sort of build. And in that case, I think it has a good place, but I wouldn't just bring this randomly otherwise. So, Determined Shot, 5 energy, 10-second recharge, bow attack. If Determined Shot hits, you strike for plus 17 damage. If Determined Shot fails to hit, all of your attack skills are recharged. This is a weird, finicky one. It does recharge itself, by the way. So it's an interesting idea, right? Recharging all of your attack skills if this fails to hit, so if it strayed from its target, works a little bit better with a flat bow randomly because of that. If you're bringing this for damage, it's really underwhelming because plus 17 damage is okay for a bow, but not exciting. 10-second recharge is definitely on the longer side for an attack, however. So hitting with this is actually not what you want to do. You want to miss with this. You want to fail to hit. And in that case, you're kind of rolling the dice, or you're specifically like, oh, I'm blind, I'm going to use this to recharge my skills, or, oh, that enemy's using whirling defense or blocking in some other way, I'm going to use this. Like, it's a cool idea, but the thing is, the incentive is very difficult for you to actually control in any sort of reliable way, and hitting is not enough of an upside that the aspect of what you're trying to do, which is fail to hit with this, weirdly enough, it doesn't quite work out for me. I'm gonna give this, I don't think it's because it does something right. I think I'm gonna give this a 2. I'm not going to bring this basically ever, but it's a cool idea, and I guess you could try to build around it, maybe, or you can include it in a build if you really want. But it honestly, it's the sort of 2 that's a 2 because it's not quite bad enough to be a 1 sort of 2, rather than a 2 because it's got a narrow place sort of 2. So, yeah, but I don't think it quite deserves to be a 3, quite bluntly. Disrupting Accuracy, 5 energy, 2-second activation time, 12-second recharge, preparation for 36 seconds. Whenever your arrows critical hit, they also interrupt your target. This is a profoundly strange thing that goes on with 3, 4 expertise skills. Disrupting Accuracy and Keen Arrow both have this critical hit theme in them for some random reason. This is a skill I'm probably not bringing on Ranger. I just don't... Critical hit rate's kind of wonky in the first place, but you really have to be critical hitting a lot for this to be at all reliable. Otherwise, it's just against a human player, it would just be randomly obnoxious, not reliably obnoxious. That said, this could be really cool on an assassin, because assassins have critical strikes and other skills. Assassins are focused on getting critical hits. So you could actually get your critical hit ratio up pretty well with Disrupting Accuracy on an assassin, and there it could be really cool. Keep in mind, assassins can use Marksmanship just fine. So I'm going to give this a 2 because I think it has a place on an assassin build, and I think that build is pretty cool, but I wouldn't use this as a ranger typically, just because you're not critical hitting enough for this to be any sort of useful interrupting in any sort of reliable or meaningful way. But on an assassin, I think you are. So, Disrupting Shot, 10 energy, second activation time, 15-second recharge. Bow attack. If this attack hits, target foe's action is interrupted. If that action was a skill, you strike for plus 34 damage. So this is kind of a variant on Savage Shot. You can see Savage Shot deals less damage and only if it was a spell. However, you'll notice Savage Shot has a 5-second recharge and Disrupting Shot has a 15-second recharge. Taking 3 times as long to recharge, even though you have more damage on more variety of things. So this will interrupt just normal attacking, but if it's a skill, any skill, it hits real hard. Savage Shot only hits real hard on spells, but that recharge is really what matters here. Interrupting, in general, you're not interrupting to do additional damage. You're interrupting to stop them from whatever it was they were doing. And so hitting harder doesn't matter as much as being able to have the skill refreshed more often. This is a 3 to me. I think that is a perfectly serviceable interrupt. It's just I only have so much space on my bar, so it just doesn't get there over Savage Shot. And that's really what its problem is. But I appreciate having some variety of options, I guess. But if this really wanted to compete with Savage Shot, it would need to be like a 7-second recharge or something like that. In which point the additional damage might actually be kind of worth the additional recharge time. But 3 times the recharge definitely is not. Favorable wins. 5 energy, 5-second activation time, 60-second recharge, Nature Ritual, you guessed it. Create a level 8 spirit. For non-spirit creatures within its range, arrows move twice as fast and strike for plus 6 damage. This spirit dies after 126 seconds, or a little over 2 minutes. So I don't usually bring nature rituals. I've stated why previously, and it's mostly because they're really finicky. You spend a lot of time setting them up, then you move out of the area of effect and you have to spend a lot more time setting them up. They have long recharges typically. You can drag them along with ritualist stuff, but then you're going out of your way. Favorable winds is useful if you have multiple rangers, and the thing is, arrows moving twice as fast means that they are more accurate, right? It's harder to dodge. It's harder to cause an arrow to... It's harder to dodge an arrow or cause it to stray when arrows move faster. Your interrupts also become a little bit more reliable because the arrow takes less time to hit. This is part of why short bows and recurve bows, which have the... I think recurve might actually have the fastest arrow, but that have fast arrows are preferable for interrupting, just because it doesn't take as long for the arrow to actually physically get there, because these skills basically imbue an arrow with the properties, and it has to hit the target, right? So your interrupts to actually work need to hit the target while they're doing their skill, and usually that's pretty reasonable to do, but like a flat bow is bad for interrupting because it takes so long for the arrow to actually get to the target that faster skills can activate before it actually gets there, shockingly enough. So, favorable winds improves all of that, makes arrows hit a bit harder as well, which is a nice benefit. But I just don't like dragging spirits around. I don't like dealing with spirits. I think this is a perfectly okay skill for a group of rangers and stuff. I'm going to give this a 2. I don't think it's like atrociously bad or anything. I think it's a perfectly serviceable effect. It's an effect that I'm happy to have. I don't mind using it, but it was... Basically, if this nature ritual would automatically follow me around, this skill would maybe be like a 3. Something like that. I definitely want to have at least 2 rangers on my party to both take advantage of it. And it does buff enemy rangers, so there's certainly areas where I would not want this. Corna, for some reason, keeps coming to mind. But the effect is useful, and I appreciate kind of where this sits. So, yeah. And the thing is, it also combos with Barrage and Volley, which is nice. But I typically am not using nature rituals because they're really cumbersome in PvE. So, here we are. Focused Shot. 5 energy, 2-second recharge time, which is very low. Bow attack. If Focused Shot hits, you strike for plus 22 damage, but all of your other attack skills are disabled for 3 seconds. So... I don't actually like this one in most scenarios, but I do like this if I'm not bringing a lot of other bow attacks. If I'm just bringing one bow attack, Focused Shot is going to be probably that bow attack most of the time because it does a lot of damage very cheaply on quick recharge. That scenario does not come up very often, but I'm going to give it a 2 because I think it's got a really good niche. I don't like it with interrupts because making your interrupts inaccessible for 3 seconds is not great. I don't like it in general, but because that disable is actually quite hampering. But if I'm only bringing one bow attack, this is a pretty solid option. So, definitely something to keep in mind. It does lose a little bit of value because of volley. But yeah, I'm fine with it. Hunter Shot, 5 energy, 1 second activation time, 10 second recharge, bow attack. If Hunter Shot hits, your target begins bleeding for 21 seconds. The main thing that this has going for it is that activation time of 1 second. Bleeding is just not an exciting condition. This used to have a very different effect, and I don't remember what it was. Bleeding was not the primary thing that this did once upon a time. Bleeding really was not something Rangers did very well at all once upon a time, and it's gotten introduced in the profession more over time. You'll see some vestiges of that when we get to Wilderness Survival. I'm not really sure why it was introduced to Ranger a bit more. It used to be a little bit more of the domain of Warrior, particularly swords, but it's just such an underwhelming condition that it doesn't really bother me. But Hunter Shot is just not a terribly exciting skill. The 10-second recharge is kind of long. Bleeding is not terribly exciting. 21 seconds of it is certainly going to be hefty damage. That's 126 damage if it goes the full duration. But it takes 21 seconds for that to happen. The biggest strength of the skill is definitely in its activation time, as it lets you sort of artificially speed up your attack rate by inserting a Hunter Shot immediately after a previous arrow has left your bow. But even with that, I don't find this a particularly exciting skill. I'm going to give this guy a 2. Bleed is just so underwhelming, and the increased activation time just isn't quite enough to salvage this one for me. Green Arrow, 5 energy, 6 second recharge, bow attack. If it hits, you strike for plus 17 damage. If you land a critical hit, you deal an additional plus 21 damage. So obviously this makes critical hits very hard. Works super well on an assassin with a bow, probably with disrupting accuracy if you want to, or if you want to go with it. I like this one quite a bit. It definitely can hit pretty hard. There are those times where you just get that additional 38 damage and it hits super hard. The recharge is reasonable. Energy cost is low. This is a very common skill for me to use. I'm going to give this guy a 4 probably because of that. It's maybe a little bit of a high 4. I'm probably overrating it slightly. Certainly Crossfire can compete with it. Slower recharge. It doesn't get the additional damage but can become unblockable, which often isn't as relevant as you want, but Keen Arrow, it can hit pretty hard, so I'm quite fond of it from that standpoint. Marauder's Shot is 10 energy, 6 second recharge, bow attack. If Marauder's Shot hits, you strike for plus 30 damage, and all of your non-attack skills are disabled for 10 seconds. Okay. Plus 30 is an awful lot of damage, I grant you. But disabling all of your non-attack skills for 10 seconds is such a huge downside. That is so long. It's just not worth it. This is a 1 for me. I do not want this skill. The damage is good, but the 10 energy is a little bit high. A lot of the time, that's going to be more like 5, which does chew through your energy a good bit. Disabling all of your non-attack skills for 10 seconds is just such a non-starter. You're cutting out basically all of your utility, or a lot of your utility when you do that. I don't bring this. If I want other skills to deal damage, I'm going to bring like penetrating attack or things like that. Power Shot is a significantly better choice, I think, a lot of the time than Marauder Shot. I do not like this skill. That disable is just so debilitating. Melandru's Shot. 5 energy, 1 second activation time, 8 second recharge, elite bow attack. If Melandru's Shot hits, your target begins bleeding for 21 seconds. So it's kind of like a Hunter Shot in that way. If it hits a foe that is moving or knocked down, that foe takes plus 22 damage and is crippled for 13 seconds. I've said it before, I'll say it again, moving targets are a lot more finicky than you expect them to be. Knocked down is a nice clause, but let's be blunt, that's also kind of finicky. As a ranger, you're not really equipped to knock anyone down, so you're going to have to be taking advantage of your allies doing that. That's a lot easier with the quick activation time on this, but this is still pretty underwhelming for me, as an elite especially. Its primary effect is inflicting the bleeding, and that's just not good enough. The bonus of plus 22 damage on crippling moving foes, however, is good. And honestly, I think in PvE, this is probably better than crippling shot, as much as it pains me to say that. The quick activation, the lower energy cost, make up for that. But it is a little finicky for that. You can kind of work with it, but you definitely have to have battlefield awareness to kind of get the most out of this. I'm going to give this one a 3, just because I do feel like it's solid enough as an elite. I'm going to look it over a lot of the time, but it's all right. Needling Shot. So this is 5 energy, 3/4 second activation time, so quicker. 4-second recharge, bow attack. Needling Shot strikes for only 26 damage. Note when it says that, that's armor ignoring damage, which is really relevant. It also moves faster than normal, so it hits the target sooner. If Needling Shot strikes a foe below 50% health, Needling Shot recharges instantly. Your other attack skills are disabled for 2 seconds. So this is similar to Focused Shot. Focused Shot has a bit more damage that it probably deals at plus 22 rather than 26 guaranteed armor ignoring damage. They both disable your other attack skills for a little bit. This is a cool skill. It works really nicely with preparations, which do add on to the damage here. That said, this is kind of a gimmicky skill. I typically don't bring it. It's real fun, though, when you get the enemy to that below 50% health zone and you just spam Needling Shot, and it's just like boom, 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 boom. If I'm bringing, like, I'm going to pick a Focus Shot over Needling Shot most of the time. But this one's cool. It's kind of fun to build around. I'm going to give it a 2 as a result. Just because I do think it is fun to build around. But it's not a standard skill that I would typically bring with me. Penetrating Attack. So Penetrating Attack and Sundering Attack are the same skill. Good ol' factions shenanigans. They are 10 energy, 3/4 second activation time, 4-second recharge. Bow attack. If Penetrating Attack or Sundering Attack hits, you strike for plus 21 damage, and the attack has 10% armor penetration. That 10% armor penetration, of course, means that it hits even harder. I'm quite fond of these skills. These are very solid damage-dealing skills, quite reliable. For me, both of these are 4s. Again, we're going on like my usage and all sorts of stuff, what I think. You might not like them as much, but the thing is, with these, that's really relevant to keep in mind, is the quick activation time of them means that you can kind of churn them out quite quickly. They can increase your DPS and stuff, so they are quite powerful in that regard as well. They have very short recharges. The biggest problem that these two skills have is they are 10 energy. Even with expertise, dropping them down to about 5, that's quite a lot, and will chew through your energy very quickly. So keep that in mind. But they are powerful, and I quite like them. Pin Down. Pin Down is 15 energy, 8-second recharge, bow attack. If it hits, your target is crippled for 13 seconds. This is a perfectly fine way of inflicting cripple. I don't usually bring Pin Down, but I don't have any objections to it. It's just a 3, right? It's a fine skill. Crippled is almost always a useful condition to inflict. But it's just Pin Down that's all it does. It's kind of expensive. It's fine. That's really all I can say. I will add that this is a little bit of what I would call a signature skill of Ranger. Like, I think of some of these skills, like, it falls into a similar category to Hamstring, except good. I'm going to pick this over Hamstring in my party. But it's one of those skills that it has such a clean, appealing icon. Like, look at how clean and appealing this icon is. It's very straightforward. It reads really nicely. I think of it as being like a skill that I see on like the box example of what the game looks like. It's an early skill that you get. It's quite nice in that regard. I just don't bring it very often. I don't need it. But, if you want crippled, this is a very solid way of going about it. That is what it does on the tin. So I don't fault anyone for bringing this. if I'm wanting to bring snares, I'm often going on off of water magic hexes more than cripple, and that's just really kind of where it falls out, quite frankly. Power shot. 10 energy, 3-second recharge, bow attack. If it hits, the target foe takes 45 armor ignoring damage. So this hits real hard because it ignores armor, or it can rather, against highly armored targets. I like this skill fine. I tend to go with penetrating attack and centering attack a little bit more often, but this one has a very quick recharge. This is another sort of like simple, clean bow attack. Similar to Pin Down in that regard, which is very appealing. I like these elegant skills like this. It's good for this one to exist. I just am a little underexcited by it. It would be a little bit cooler at like 7 energy. 10 is kind of a lot, especially like it still goes down to 5, right? But that still is quite hefty and kind of eats up your bar. It is a companion piece, I guess, to power attack, the warrior strength skill. I feel like this one is kind of a high 3 for me. I go with penetrating attack and centering attack before I go with this one. But this is perfectly serviceable. Works well with preparations that increase damage and stuff like that. And it's a reasonable, perfectly fine skill, but it's very unexciting and unadorned, and that kind of makes me go about it. But it probably performs pretty well in high level areas just because of the armor ignoring nature of it. So precision shots. This one is one that I remember changing over time, but I don't remember what it used to be. It's 10 energy, 1-second activation time, 6-second recharge, bow attack. If it hits, you strike for +9 damage. It cannot be blocked. This action is easily interrupted for some reason. I don't remember what this used to be. That's an interesting question. That's something I could probably look up on the Guild Wars wiki if I cared to, but it doesn't really matter. We care about what the game is, not what it was, at least for the skill review. I'm not going to give skills scores on something that they used to do, or OTG's try would have been a 1 or a 0. But that's not what it is. So instead it's like a 2 or whatever it was. But anyway, we're rating skills on what they are, and precision shot is just very underwhelming to me. +9 damage is very low. Not being able to be blocked is nice, but like, okay, here's the thing. Crossfire has less recharge, more damage, less energy cost, can't be blocked. Does not have some weird clause about being easily interrupted. Arcing shot is more damage still and cannot be blocked. 5 energy. Its downside is it moves a bit slower. So I'm going to pick probably either of those before I pick precision shot. Precision shot is just super underwhelming to me. The quicker activation is nice. The cannot be blocked is nice. The easily interrupted is perplexing. It's like, that's not going to happen very often, to be clear, because like 1-second activation time with the arrow coming out at the half-second mark means that that's not going to come up often. It's just the +9 damage is just so low that I have no reason to want to use this. So I'm going to give this guy like a 2. A lot of attack skills are going to have a hard time being lower than a 2 just because they all technically do something. But this is not a high pick for me. I'm not going to use this all that often, if ever. Just because it's very underwhelming. The damage is just super low. The energy cost is perplexingly high. The easily interruptible, like this is an example of a skill where all of the knobs just are tuned just slightly enough that is just so unexciting. If it had a significantly lower recharge, or like even that's not the biggest deal, but if it was like 5 energy and like 12 damage and like a 4-second recharge, it'd be way more exciting. But it's just like the damage is just a little bit low, the energy cost is just a little bit high, the recharge is just a little bit long. It's like all of those kind of conspire to make this a very underwhelming skill. Prepared shot. 5 energy, 6-second recharge, elite bow attack. If this attack hits, you strike for +22 damage. If you are under the effects of a preparation, you gain 7 energy. Keep in mind that the relative gain of this is more than 2 because expertise is probably lowering the cost of this skill. This is fine. It's a 3. Again, preparations lose a lot of stature because of the prevalence and power of volley and barrage. Obviously, volley is the relevant one here because barrage and this are competing for elite slot. This is okay for energy. You're more bringing this because this is a net negative energy attack skill that hits pretty hard. It's fine. I like the space it's playing in with interacting with having a preparation. That's appreciated. I kind of wish it maybe did a little bit more, but it's fine. I've run it. I don't hate it. It's just a little underwhelming. The thing is, body shot is arguably a little bit better than it, and non-elite, so body shot's going to happen a lot more often. Punishing shot. 10 energy, a half-second activation time, 5-second recharge, elite bow attack. If punishing shot hits, you strike for plus 18 damage, and your target is interrupted. This is basically the elite version of like savage shot. It's got the same stats, but this always does plus damage, and interrupts. It's fine. It's solid. It's a 3 for me. The thing is, like, if it wasn't an elite, I would probably bring it over savage shot, but it is an elite, and therefore it's competing in the elite slot, and when I'm bringing a ranger, my elite's probably going to be something else. That's really what it comes down to. Like, I would be perfectly happy to run this skill, but the elite slot is the contention point, and I'd rather bring something like blast arrows or barrage or a couple of other options, incendiary arrows perhaps, or whatnot. It is good if you're trying to go more for an interrupty style build rather than a damage build, damage-oriented build, and it does work pretty well in kind of a spike situation. Not that that matters in PvE, but here we are. So, perfectly fine. An absolute pain in the butt to capture because it's off on an enemy in Prophecies in the middle of freaking Shiver Peak Mountains. But, you know, it's a perfectly fine skill. Rapid Fire. 5 energy, 2-second recharge, or 2-second activation, 12-second recharge. Preparation for 21 seconds, you attack 33% faster while wielding a bow. So, it's okay. Here's the thing. Your preparation slot is a little bit contentious. Either because you can't bring a preparation because you're using volley or barrage. I bring them up all the time because they are supremely good. Area of effect is very good in this game. Volley and barrage are your area of effect bow attacks. They don't work with preparations because I guess that would be too powerful. I mean, technically there's incendiary arrows, and you could work this with incendiary arrows, but usually you're going for a more exciting preparation than this. There are other ways to increase your attack speed. Say it with me, everyone. Never rampage alone. That's an option. You could go with like Frenzy if you wanted to from the Warrior. No attribute skills. You can go with Expert's Dexterity, which of course does require expertise, but you want that anyway. You don't even strictly need to increase attack speed. It's always helpful, of course. That said, this is an okay skill. It's just a little under-exciting. I'm going to give this a 3, I think. It is a way to increase your attack speed. It just has a really hard time working on a bar. And honestly, that 3, like, is maybe a little bit misleading. I just don't feel like it's quite a 2. It doesn't feel quite 2 territory to me. I don't know. That's where I'm going to stick it. It's borderline. It's borderline between 2 and 3. It's maybe a 2.5. And I'm giving it a little bit of a bump. Read the Wind. 5 energy, 2-second activation time, 12-second recharge. Preparation for 24 seconds. Your arrows move twice as fast and deal 9 extra damage. The 9 extra damage is nice. That's going to be armor ignoring. You bring this because it's twice as fast and it makes your arrows more accurate and easier to interrupt with, that sort of thing. This is kind of a... So this is the standard preparation. It's kind of like a favorable winds. I would bring this over favorable winds sort of caveats all around. Volley barrage, rear their heads again, making preparations less exciting. It's okay. It doesn't require another attribute, which is nice. I'm going to give this one a 3, but this is a high 3. I don't bring preparations very often because volley and barrage push them off my bar. That's really what this comes down to. And if that wasn't the case, Read the Wind is probably a preparation I'd use more often, just because having that additional damage, that additional accuracy is really nice. It's just the area of effect of volley and barrage is just so valuable. Volley or barrage, I should say. You don't bring both because barrage outclasses volley and the recharge is low enough. Anyway, those skills are just good enough that you just bring them, and that pushes preparations off your bar. So it has to be a really strong preparation to overpower volley or barrage. And something like Glass Arrows can do that. Read the Wind has a really hard time doing that. So that's really what it comes down to here. Savage Shot. I've referenced this one a number of times. It is 10 energy, half-second activation time, 5-second recharge. The recharge is really nice on this. Bow attack. If Savage Shot hits, your target's action is interrupted. If that action was a spell, you strike for plus 25 damage, which is nice. You bring this because it's an interrupt. This is a 5. It along with Disrupting Shot are basically stapled to any bow ranger build I ever make. They're basically your most reliable, quickest recharging interrupts. Like, so if you look at interrupt options here, you'll notice that there's Savage Shot, Disrupting Shot, and those are your non-elite interrupts here. And Ranger is thought of as a profession with interrupts on the back of Savage Shot and Disrupting Shot up here in expertise. These two skills, along with a handful of elites, which kind of augment or accent the interrupting nature, but Distracting Shot and Savage Shot are the non-elite skills that make it clear that Ranger is about interrupting things. Concussion Shot does do that, but it's way, specialized. So it's those two that you're really focusing on. Those are the ones that make the Ranger the disrupting class that it is, rather than a class with disruption. Like Warrior has some interrupts, but no, Savage Shot and Disrupting Shot make it clear that the Ranger is good at interrupting things. And that's part of why you would bring a Ranger, and so these skills tend to be stapled to my bar as a result. Screaming Shot is aside from having a weird name, it's 10 energy, 8-second recharge bow attack. If it hits, you deal plus 22 damage. If your target is within earshot, that foe begins bleeding for 17 seconds. So I want to remind you that specifically earshot range is this white bubble right here. And it's actually... bows can go outside of that range. You're often going to be attacking enemies in this range, but if you're kind of going for the longer range, particularly with a flat bow or a long bow, you can easily be outside of that range. So it's far from... oh, now I have to scroll all the way back down. It's far from reliable that this will inflict bleeding. Honestly, this skill is a bit expensive. This is playing into the aspect that Ranger's not good at inflicting bleeding, or at least traditionally it wasn't. At least with bows. Bows were not good at inflicting bleeding. Hunter Shot obviously is trying to say otherwise. Melandry Shot, Screaming Shot are all ways of giving it bleeding. But Screaming Shot is just... it's a little underwhelming. I'm going to give this one a 3. I think it's fine. I certainly prefer it to Hunter Shot because it deals plus damage. And the plus damage is pretty solid. I typically am not going to bring this, though. It just gets outclassed by Penetrating Sundering Attack. So, yeah, here we are. It's just not usually coming along with. Seeking Arrows. I guess you could use this one with Prepared Stance in the elites as well. But anyway, this is 15 energy, 2-second activation time, 20-second recharge. Preparation for 12 seconds. Your arrows cannot be blocked. Seeking Arrows ends if you fail to hit. You can fail to hit because you miss, or the target dodges / your arrows stray from them, or you're obstructed, things like that. There are plenty of reasons why you might not be able to hit aside from your enemy blocking. I appreciate that this skill exists. It is a way for rangers to get around blocking. It is a preparation, so it doesn't work with volley and barrage. It's a 2. If you need a way to be able to get your arrows through block, here's a good option. You do have some attack skills that can get through, like crossfire. There's called shot, which is way down in the no attributes, which is just an attack that is unblockable and has a faster arrow move speed, but doesn't do any plus damage. Seeking arrows does not have 100% uptime. You can get that with the one stance that I was mentioning that would increase the duration by 126% and have the recharge down to 10 seconds, which is really what does it. But honestly, I just don't think that's worth it. It just doesn't come up often enough that you need to be able to get through block that badly. Maybe... but if you're facing it in corner, I'd rather just bring a dervish with wild blow or anything with a scythe and wild blow, so a warrior or a dervish or whatever, to knock down the blocks. So it exists, it's fine. It provides you a counter strategy to block. That's always really good to have, but it's underwhelming to me. It takes up your preparation slot. And remember, preparations don't work with volley or barrage. So I appreciate that it exists. And it's an important part of the design that it exists. It's an important part of counterplay. But this is not what you're trying to do a lot of the time. Because you're not worrying about enemies blocking your arrows, is what I'm coming to. Sloth Hunter's Shot. 10 energy, 8-second recharge, bow attack. If it hits, your target foe takes plus 22 damage. If that foe is not using a skill, Sloth Hunter's Shot deals an additional plus 30 damage. This is kind of like a variant on the Mesmer Wastrel stuff that cares about enemies not using skills. You'll see an assassin thing that does something along those lines as well. This can hit like an absolute friggin' truck. Plus 52 damage. This is probably a 4 for me. I don't bring it as often as I should, realistically speaking. It does have a little bit of a longer recharge. It is kind of higher in the energy cost, but man, this can hit so friggin' hard. So this is very powerful, and well worth consideration, I think, for using. I do tend to bring something like Sundering Attack ahead of it. Keep in mind, Sundering Attack is going to be able to get off roughly twice per one of these guys, so that plus 21 and 10% armor penetration can kind of add up to that 50 in that time frame. Something to keep in mind. I do think Sloth Undershot, though, like along with Keen Arrow, is one of those arrow attacks that I am more inclined to go towards. So just something to remember. Splinter Shot. Splinter Shot is 10 energy, 5-second recharge. If it hits, you deal a measly plus 13 damage. If Splinter Shot is blocked, all foes adjacent to your target, which I think probably includes your target, take 53 damage. And that's going to be armor ignoring. This is ostensibly really powerful if it's getting blocked. I am so unexcited by it if it isn't. To me, this is somewhere between a 2 and a 3. I'm likely not wanting to bring it in an area unless I know blocking's happening, but that is something that can happen enough that this can be okay. The plus damage on it is so unexciting, though, that, like... So this rider effect is... It's the sort of thing where if you have... So I'm going to take this moment to kind of discuss a concept here. If you have some sort of effect that is sort of the draw of the skill... You want that to be something the player has control over. The person using that skill has control over. So in this case, the draw of the skill is if it's blocked, all foes adjacent to your target take 53 damage. Because the primary effect of it hitting of plus 13 damage is very weak for the energy cost of 10. And it would still be underwhelming if it cost 5, although acceptable at that point. Or mildly acceptable. But like Keen Arrow is the same, slightly longer recharge, but 17 damage, right? So 13 isn't terribly far off of that. This has the benefit of being a critical. It deals a bunch of plus damage. So, like, at 10 energy, this just can't compete with something like that. I do not have control over whether or not the enemy is going to block this attack. The enemy doesn't even have entire control over it. Some stuff can, but can guaranteed block. But a lot of the time, blocks are 75% chances. That's the most common percent chance to block. So and that's going to be on like stances and stuff, or 50% off of like Guardian. So the enemy is going to be using some sort of skill that gives them a chance to block. I can know that they're using that skill, but even if I'm doing that, there's no guarantee that this will be blocked. So I do not have control of any kind on the AoE effect of this happening. So the skill is balanced around the AoE effect. If this was like reliably doing that, it would be outstanding. But it doesn't reliably do that AoE effect. It's very unreliable. That is the bulk appeal of the skill, but the bulk appeal of the skill is something I have no control over. That's a poor design decision because it means that I'm not going to really bring this along because it feels like it's just not going to do anything a lot of the time. It feels like a lot of the time it's only going to do plus 13 damage, and I have other choices I can do that are going to hit harder, such as Sundering Attack right down here. So the problem with Splinter Shot is the primary thing you want to do with it, you have no control over. If it was one of those things where it was a nice bonus, where it was additive, that it would do additional damage, where I'm okay with the base effect. Like, I'm okay with Keen Arrow only doing plus 17 damage. I'm not thrilled by it, but I'm okay with it. I'm not okay with Splinter Shot only doing plus 13 damage off of that energy cost. It's just too high. So this is one of those things where this skill probably would be more appealing to me if it was like 5 energy plus around 17, 18 damage and like 35 damage off of the block clause. Obviously, that's less powerful on the block part. It front loads more of the power, but front loads more of the power in the part that I have control over, the part that's going to happen a lot of the time, because this is a skill that feels like a lot of the time it's going to be really underwhelming, because it will be. So from a design standpoint, this is kind of designed backwards. So you want, like, Savage Shot is costed around, and like it's predicated around interrupting. The value of this is the interrupt. That's the reliable part. That's the part that I have most control over, relatively speaking. I can use it to try to interrupt something. If it happens to be a spell and hit way harder because of that, that's cool. That's a nice bonus. I'm happy for that bonus. That's not why I'm bringing this skill. I'm bringing this skill because of the interrupt, which is the reliable part. Splinter Shot, if I were to bring this, I would bring it for the blocked clause, and that's the unreliable part. So I'm not going to bring it. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Know why your player is bringing this skill, what it is that they want around it, what its purpose serves for them. There's some other skill that I feel like was doing something similar that I wanted to compare this to, but I'm kind of blanking on what it was at the moment. But yeah, so what it really comes down to is know why your player is bringing the skill, and tailor the rewards of the skill around that. So yeah, Splinter Shot to me it's a 2 because it does something. It's an attack skill, but it's kind of a low 2. Like, I'm not going to bring this because it just reads so underwhelming. It just feels so underwhelming to read it. Plus 13 damage for 10 energy. Like, when I read this, I don't see that bonus a lot of the time because I know that bonus isn't going to happen a lot of the time. So why am I bringing this skill? If this was something where it was like Splinter Shot, 10 energy, half-second activation time, 5-second recharge, a bow attack, if Splinter Shot hits, it interrupts that foe. If it's blocked, all foes adjacent to the target take the damage. Cool. I would absolutely bring this probably over Savage Shot. Seriously. Because the plus damage on Savage Shot isn't as relevant to me as like suddenly getting this AoE effect off of a blocked arrow. But plus 13 damage is just not good enough for me to bring it. So I just wanted to cover that design thing because I think it's really important. I think it's really relevant. And I think it's something that we can get out of this review project beyond just me rating a bunch of Guild Wars 1 skills. We can look at design. We can analyze design. And this is one of those cases where the design of this skill is just not quite proper to make it something that appeals to me. Okay, moving along. Sundering attack I already talked about. Same as penetrating attack. It's a 4. Moving on. Volley. Volley is a 5. I'm going to give it a 5. I'm almost always bringing this when I'm using a bow. The only times I'm not is if I'm trying to do something that it doesn't work with, so I'm using a preparation, or I'm bringing barrage, it doesn't work with that. So if I'm using a bow, I'm probably using volley. There are a couple circumstances where I might not, but usually that's going to be the case. So let's go ahead and read it. I've mentioned it so much. It's 5 energy, 2-second recharge, bow attack. All of your preparations are removed. Shoot arrows at target foe and up to 3 foes adjacent to your target. These arrows strike for plus 8 damage if they hit. Okay. This skill is too good. Area of effect is just so powerful that this skill single-handedly is contributing to me not using and running preparations. Barrage is extremely powerful, don't get me wrong, and that also contributes to the problem. And I appreciate that there's a non-elite version, but the problem is the non-elite version further invalidates preparations. If I want to do another elite, I can't bring barrage, but I can bring volley, and that makes preparations actively worse. The problem here that we're running into, this is another design lesson. Like, volley is really, really good because area of effect is super good, and removing it would make a ranger actively worse as a profession. But volley being that good actually makes an entire aspect of ranger, preparations, invalid. You cannot bring them with volley because you're going to lose them. You're going to waste a skill slot. You're going to waste time activating them. Volley is just phenomenal. It's way super powerful because area of effect is just so good. So this skill needs, like, ranger needs this skill. Paragon wishes it had something like this skill so badly. But because it removes preparations, it single-handedly makes preparations worse. I would be a lot more interested in seeing this skill have a 3, maybe 4-second recharge and not have the all your preparations are removed clause. I'd even be interested in doing it having like 3, 4-second recharge, dealing less plus damage. Like that plus 8 damage is piddling anyway. If it didn't have that, obviously it wouldn't scale with anything. Actually, you know what would make this skill way more interesting? Let's do a little bit of design work. 5 energy is fine. Let's give it 3, 4-second recharge, something to play around with, but a little bit longer recharge is fine. 2 seconds is obviously preferable, but, you know. Let's strike that all preparations are removed clause. Let's strike the plus damage, and let's have that additional targets scale with marksmanship. That is more interesting skill. That is a skill that works with preparations instead of relegating them to never show up on a bar. That's a better design, in my opinion, because it does not invalidate a part of the ranger's build. Volley is going to want to be on my bar because area of effect is so valuable. That incentivizes higher marksmanship, especially if, like, 3 foes was the, say, 12 marksmanship breakpoint, and if you could get up to 4 foes at, like, 15, 16 marksmanship, something like that, that'd be really cool scaling. So it rewards you for going higher into marksmanship in a way that matters more. It working with preparations would do so much to make the preparations matter to rangers. It's just, here's the thing, is unfortunately, preparations are not very valuable to me as a ranger because volley and barrage, but especially volley, doesn't work with them. And so I don't bring them. This is the fundamental problem here. It's a fundamental design flaw, in my opinion, that you're taking a unique aspect of your profession and you're throwing it away on the strength of a skill like this. So that's kind of my rant about this. I genuinely feel like volley is a skill that rangers need or are really benefited by, but boy, does it harm the profession at the same time. It's simultaneously vital for them and absolutely debilitating. And that's just, it's all about the design. It's all about how powerful AoE is in PvE. Keep in mind, volley and barrage are both way, way worse in PvP. People spread out better in PvP. Other effects are way more useful. Area of effect is nowhere near as good in PvP as it is in PvE. But from a PvE standpoint, player versus environment against a normal AI, AoE is super powerful, and volley's being the contributor of that, being a key way of getting that on the Ranger, invalidates preparations, and it's just unfortunate. It's just an unfortunate aspect of the design. So I think it's really important to think about this sort of stuff, to analyze this sort of stuff, to consider the consequences of the skills that you bring, or skills that you create, things that you create for your game. Think about how they interact with the other pieces. And if you're doing something like this, where you have classes, professions, whatever, think about the way that skills that are going to end up becoming vital aspects of a bar because of what they do invalidate whole classes of skills because you've stapled it onto the skill. I understand why. I understand that you don't want to make things super powerful as a consequence. You don't want to make something like apply poison allow you to be able to just like spread poison en masse, but spells can do that. So why can't Rangers off of something like volley? Make this 10 energy and remove all your preparations are removed clause. That would be acceptable. There's all sorts of ways that you can adjust this, but that remove preparations clause is just, from a design standpoint, is just so atrocious. And I understand it's there to try to balance things out, to try to make it so that way volley doesn't become too powerful with preparations, but the problem is it makes preparations awful because volley is so good. So that is my rant. I feel very passionate about this sort of thing, but I'm going to need to wrap here. So until next time, everyone, take care and goodbye.